The air in the long hallway felt heavy, like it was waiting for something to break. Golden lamps on the walls cast flickering shadows over the polished marble floor. Outside the heavy oak doors, four men stood like statues. They wore sharp black suits and dark sunglasses, their arms crossed tight. Inside those doors, the city's most dangerous leaders were meeting to talk about power. But in the hallway, it was perfectly silent. Kim stood at the center of his guards. He did not move, and he did not seem to breathe. His black suit was perfectly tailored, and his luxury watch caught the light whenever he moved his hands. People called him the Ghost because he was known for his icy detachment. His eyes were usually as cold as stone, showing no feelings at all. Suddenly, a soft sound broke the silence. It was the sound of small, bare feet stepping on the cold floor. The guards reached for their jackets, their faces turning into masks of steel. But they stopped when the visitor stepped into the warm light. She was tiny. Her dark hair was a tangled mess, and her face was covered in streaks of dirt and dried tears. She was a disheveled 6-year-old girl named Lydia. She wore a worn gray shirt that was way too big for her, and her eyes were wide with a deep, quiet heartbreak. She looked like a small, broken bird in a place filled with gold and guns. She walked straight toward Kim. The guard stepped forward to block her way, but Kim raised a single hand. They froze instantly. The little girl stopped right in front of him. Her arm was fully extended as she reached out to him. In her small fingers was a crumpled piece of white paper. Right in the middle was a vivid, fresh red bloodstain splashed across the center. Kim looked down at the girl, then at the note. For a second, his cold face did not move. Then, he reached out and gripped the paper with both hands. As his eyes scanned the messy handwriting, something impossible happened. The ghost began to crack. His expression was shattered. His eyes went wide, his brows furrowed deeply, and his mouth opened in shock. He was not just looking at a piece of paper. He was looking at a desperate plea from a woman he thought was dead. The powerful men around him whispered in surprise. They had never seen Kim look so human or so terrified. He ignored the high-stakes summit behind him and the guards standing nearby. He only saw the little girl who was his daughter and the bloodstain that changed his world forever. This was the start of a war he never saw coming, and the city's heartless man had finally found the one thing he was afraid to lose. Kim's hands, usually as steady as stone, began to tremble as he held the crumpled paper. The edges of the note crinkled under his grip, and the fresh blood in the center seemed to glow under the warm, golden lights of the corridor. He did not look at the heavy oak doors or the men waiting for the high-stakes summit. He only saw the messy, looping letters written by a hand he had never expected to see again. The bloodstain had partially blurred a single, desperate word, save. Beneath that word was a name, Minhee. It was a name Kim had tried to bury 7 years ago to survive in his cold, violent world. The note was short, but it hit him harder than any bullet ever could. It told him that the woman he once loved was alive and being held by his enemies. Most importantly, it revealed the truth about the little girl standing in front of him. "Sir," one of the guards whispered, stepping closer. He looked at the other men in disbelief. They had seen Kim order terrifying things without blinking, but now, their boss looked completely shattered. His eyes were wide, and he seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. The ghost was shaking in front of Child. Kim did not answer his men. Instead, he slowly dropped to one knee on the hard marble floor. This was the most shocking move of all. Kim never knelt for anyone, yet here he was, ignoring his expensive suit and his pride. He brought his face level with the little girl's dirt-smudged cheeks. Lydia did not pull away. She just watched him with her heartbroken, tear-streaked eyes. Kim reached out, his fingers hovering for a second before he gently touched her tangled hair. "Your name," Kim said, his voice no longer a cold command, but a broken whisper. "What is your name?" "Lydia," she whispered back. Her voice was tiny, almost lost in the quiet hallway. Kim closed his eyes as a single tear traced a path down his face. The note confirmed what his heart already knew. She wasn't just a messenger. She had his eyes, the same icy blue stare that usually made grown men scream for mercy. But in her, They were full of a hope he didn't think he deserved. The guards watched in total silence, their stern faces finally showing a flicker of fear. They realized that their boss was no longer just a mafia king. Kim tucked the bloody note into his pocket and stood up, lifting Lydia into his arms. She was so light, like she hadn't been cared for in a long time. "Cancel the summit," Kim ordered. His voice turned back into steel, sharp with a new, terrifying anger. "Find out who touched her mother. I want their heads by sunrise." He turned away from the meeting and the power he had spent years building. He walked down the corridor, holding his daughter tight against his chest. The heartless man was gone, and a father ready to burn the city down had taken his place. The elevator opened directly into Kim's penthouse, a place of cold glass and dark shadows that overlooked the glowing city of Seoul. Kim stepped out, still holding Lydia tightly. He didn't put her down until they reached the center of the massive living room. The apartment felt more like a museum than a home. There were no family photos or messy blankets, just expensive art and rows of flickering surveillance monitors built into the walls. Lydia stood on the thick black rug, looking smaller than ever. She clutched the hem of her oversized gray shirt, her eyes darting toward the screens. The monitors showed his men patrolling the gates with heavy weapons and cameras tracking every movement in the dark alleys below. This was Kim's world, a fortress built for war. Kim watched her for a moment, his jaw tight. He looked at his own hands, then at the dirt still smudging her cheeks. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief. He knelt again, moving slowly so he wouldn't scare her. He dipped the corner of the cloth into a glass of water on the table and gently began to wipe the streaks of grime from her face. His hand was large enough to cover her entire head, but he moved with a softness that made his guards whisper in the hallway. "Wait here," Kim said quietly. He stood up and barked a command into his phone. He didn't ask for a report on the rival gangs. Instead, he told his deadliest team to go out and buy everything a 6-year-old needs. An hour later, the front door opened. 3 muscular men in dark suits walked in, looking very out of place. One held a bright pink backpack, another carried a pile of soft blankets, and the third struggled with a giant, fluffy blue teddy bear. They set the items down in a corner of the room, right beneath the glowing security screens. Kim began to transform the cold space. He spread a thick, colorful rug over the hard floor and piled the toys in a corner. It was a strange sight, the lion's nursery. A soft stuffed animal sat on a mahogany table right next to a tablet showing live weapon counts and exit routes. Lydia walked over to the bear and touched its ear. For the first time, the terror in her eyes faded just a little. Kim stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. He looked at the monitors, then back at the little girl hugging the bear. He realized that keeping her safe meant more than just hiring guards. He had to bring color into a world that had been black and white for too long. He was still a king in a world of monsters, but as he watched Lydia finally close her weary eyes, he knew he would turn his whole empire into a shield to keep her from ever feeling the cold again. The quiet in the penthouse was broken only by the hum of the computers. Kim sat at his desk, but his eyes were fixed on Lydia. She was sitting on the floor, trying to make the giant blue teddy bear stay upright against the sofa. In the corner of the room, a man named Park, Kim's lead investigator, walked in silently. He didn't say a word. He simply held out a digital tablet. On the screen, a red line showed a perfect match. Kim's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of his desk. The blood on the note didn't belong to a stranger or a rival soldier. It was a DNA match for Minhee. She was hurt, and the Black Crane Syndicate was making sure Kim knew it. They weren't just asking for a meeting. They were showing him that they had his past in their claws. "Daddy," Lydia's small voice echoed in the large room. She had stopped playing with the bear and was looking at Kim. "Why are you making that face?" Kim forced his expression to soften. He didn't want her to see the ghost that other men feared. "It's nothing, Lydia. Just work." "Is Mommy coming soon?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The men with the crane tattoos said you would bring her." Kim felt a cold shiver run down his spine. They had already been talking to her. He walked toward her, intending to pick her up, but a sharp crack suddenly filled the air. It sounded like a whip snapping right next to his ear. One of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows groaned as a spiderweb of cracks instantly spread across the reinforced glass. A small, neat hole appeared exactly where Kim's head had been a second before. Kim didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, throwing his body over Lydia and pinning her to the plush rug. He rolled with her, using his own back as a shield, until they were behind a heavy marble pillar. "Get down! Lights out!" Kim roared. The penthouse went dark instantly. His guards moved like shadows, their boots thudding against the floor as they took positions near the windows. Outside, a tiny red laser danced across the marble pillar, searching for a target. It was a message from the North Tower across the street. The sniper could have killed Kim, but the shot had been aimed just inches away. Kim held Lydia's head against his chest. He could feel her heart beating wildly, like a trapped bird. She wasn't crying. She was too terrified to even make a sound. Kim looked at the spiderweb in the glass and felt a new kind of fear, a fear he had never known in all his years as a boss. The Black Cranes weren't just attacking his business. They were hunting his blood. He realized then that the stakes had changed. This wasn't a game of territory or money anymore. Every second Lydia stayed in this city, she was a target. He pulled her closer, his eyes glowing with a dark, dangerous light in the shadows. The Black Cranes wanted a war? He would give them one that would burn their entire world to the ground. The heavy steel shutters hissed as they sealed the penthouse shut, turning the luxury home into a windowless bunker. Inside, the only light came from the dim lamps over the kitchen island. Kim had removed his suit jacket, revealing the dark ink of tattoos that wound around his muscular arms like shadows. He sat on a low stool across from Lydia, a small bowl of warm rice porridge between them. He picked up the silver spoon. His hand, which had gripped a pistol only minutes ago, looked massive and awkward against the delicate ceramic. He blew on the steam, his face focused and intense, as if he were disarming a bomb. He moved slowly, trying to hide the fact that his fingers were still vibrating from the adrenaline of the sniper attack. "Eat," he said. His voice was a low rumble, but he kept it as soft as he could. Lydia didn't reach for the spoon. She watched him with wide, curious eyes. She looked at the scars on his knuckles and then up at the cold, sharp line of his jaw. "The men at the bus stop said you were the ghost," she whispered. Her voice was small, but it filled the quiet room. "They said everyone is scared of you." Kim paused, the spoon halfway to her. He didn't look away. He could see his own reflection in her blue eyes. A man who looked more like a predator than a protector. "People say many things, Lydia. Most of them are just stories." "Are you a bad man?" she asked. It wasn't a mean question. It was the simple, honest question of a child trying to understand why her new home was a fortress filled with men who never smiled. The question hung in the air like a thick fog. Kim felt a sharp pang in his chest that felt more painful than any wound he had ever received in a back-alley brawl. He looked at the silk handkerchief resting on the counter, the one he had used to clean the dirt from her cheeks, and then at the cold, hard steel of the handgun tucked into his waistband. He was both of those things at once. "I have done bad things," Kim said slowly, choosing his word with care. "I have lived in the dark for a long time, but I am here to make sure the dark doesn't touch you." Lydia reached out and touched the back of his hand. Her fingers were tiny and warm against his skin. "Mommy said you were a prince, but she said your palace was full of shadows." Kim's throat tightened, and he had to look down so she wouldn't see the flash of pain in his eyes. He realized then that he couldn't just be a boss anymore. To save Minhee and keep Lydia safe, he had to find the man he used to be, the one who hadn't forgotten how to love. He gently guided the spoon to her, and this time she took a bite. "I will get her back, Lydia," he promised, his voice steadying into a vow. "I will clear the shadows." For the first time in years, Kim wasn't thinking about power or territory. He was thinking about redemption. But as a red light began to flash on the security panel across the room, he knew the ghost would have to haunt the city one last time to make that promise come true. The red light on the security panel continued to blink, a rhythmic heartbeat that signaled trouble. Kim placed the spoon back into the bowl and stood up. He didn't make a sound, but but the air in the room suddenly felt freezing. He checked the screen. It wasn't an attack from the outside. It was an alert from his private server. Someone had accessed the penthouse security codes from an encrypted tablet inside the building. "Park," Kim whispered into his earpiece. "Take Lydia to the safe room. Do not let her see the monitors." Park appeared from the shadows, his face pale. He gently led Lydia away. She clutched her blue teddy bear to her chest, looking back at Kim one last time. Kim waited until the heavy vault door clicked shut before he turned his attention to the man standing by the elevator. Lee, his youngest and most trusted bodyguard. Lee was busy tapping on a small handheld device, his back to the room. He didn't hear Kim move. Kim was the ghost for a reason. He moved like a shadow across the marble floor. By the time Lee sensed the presence behind him, Kim's hand was already locked around the younger man's throat, pinning him against the cold glass wall. "The Black Cranes pay well, don't they?" Kim's voice was a terrifying, low growl. Lee gasped, his eyes bulging as he dropped the tablet. It clattered to the floor, the screen showing a live feed of the penthouse's weak spots, the very spots the sniper had aimed for earlier. "Sir, please," Lee choked out. "They have my family. They said they'd kill them if I didn't give them the codes." Kim's grip didn't loosen. In the past, he would have ended this instantly without a second thought. But as he looked at the tablet, he thought of Lydia shivering behind the marble pillar. Lee hadn't just sold a secret. He had put a target on a child's head. The betrayal burned hotter than any bullet wound. "You led them to her," Kim said, his eyes turning to ice. "You told them where she sleeps." He didn't scream or shout. Instead, Kim signaled to two other guards who emerged from the kitchen. They grabbed Lee by the arms, their faces grim. Kim picked up the tablet and crushed it under his leather shoe, the screen shattering into 1,000 pieces. "Take him to the basement," Kim ordered. "Clean the house. Check every phone, every tablet, and every weapon. If there is another rat in my walls, I want them found before the sun comes up." The guards dragged the sobbing traitor toward the service elevator. The room fell silent again, but the peace was gone. Kim stood alone in the dark living room, looking at the broken glass on the floor. He realized that the palace of shadows Lydia had mentioned was even more dangerous than he thought. He couldn't trust his walls, and he couldn't trust his men. He walked to the safe room door and placed his palm against the scanner. He had to be the only shield Lydia had left. As the door opened, he saw her sitting on the floor, waiting for him. He wiped a stray drop of sweat from his forehead and forced a small, tired smile. To keep her safe, the ghost would have to be more than a boss. He would have to be a monster to his enemies, so he could remain a father to her. The penthouse was silent, except for the low hum of the safe room's air vents. Kim sat on the edge of a velvet chair, his eyes locked on a black burner phone resting on the coffee table. He had spent the last hour checking his gear, sliding extra magazines into his belt, and checking the hidden blade in his sleeve. His movements were rhythmic and mechanical, the way they always were before a job. But his gaze kept drifting to the door where Lydia was sleeping. Suddenly, the burner phone vibrated, skittering across the table like a trapped insect. Kim snatched it up before the first ring could end. He didn't say hello. He simply waited. "You look tired on the cameras, ghost." A voice rasped through the speaker. It was a distorted, mocking sound. Having a child in the house makes a man slow. It makes him soft. Kim's jaw tightened so hard it ached. "Where is Min?" "She's alive for now, but her time is running out, just like yours." The caller paused, let out a dry laugh, and then the tone changed to ice. "We don't want your money, Kim. We want the docks. We want every shipping route, every warehouse, and every contract you own. You walk into the Incheon shipyard tonight alone. You sign the transfer papers, and maybe, just maybe, we let the woman go." "And the girl?" Kim asked, his voice a dangerous whisper. "The girl is a loose end," the voice replied. "But if you cooperate, we might let her grow up without a father instead of without a life." The line went dead. Kim stared at the blank screen, his heart thumping against his ribs like a war drum. He knew this was a trap. The Black Cranes didn't just want his territory. They wanted to execute the ghost in front of his own men to show the city that the old king was dead. They expected him to bring an army, which would give them an excuse to kill Minhee instantly. He stood up and walked to the safe room. He didn't go in. He just looked through the small reinforced glass window. Lydia was curled up with her blue teddy bear, her breathing slow and even. She looked so peaceful, completely unaware that her father was preparing for a one-way trip. Kim turned to Park, who was standing nearby with a worried expression. "If I don't come back by dawn," Kim said, his voice flat and steady, "you take her to the airport. Use the names I gave you. You hide her so well that not even I could find her." "Sir, you can't go alone," Park urged, stepping forward. "It's suicide." Kim didn't argue. He just adjusted his cuffs and put on his black suit jacket, hiding the weapons underneath. He looked like the wealthy businessman the world knew, but his eyes were full of a dark, ancient fire. He wasn't going as a boss. He was going as a man who had nothing left to lose except the little girl in the other room. He walked toward the elevator, the heavy weight of the past dragging behind him, ready to pay whatever price the Black Cranes demanded. The Incheon shipyard at midnight was a graveyard of rusting iron and rotting wood. A thick fog rolled off the yellow sea, smelling of salt, oil, and old secrets. High above, a single flickering spotlight swung back and forth, cutting through the mist like a searching eye. Kim stepped out of his black sedan, his leather shoes clicking softly against the damp pavement. He stood alone in the center of the yard, surrounded by towering shipping containers that looked like giant, silent monsters in the dark. He could feel the eyes on him, hidden in the shadows of the cranes and behind the steel crates. The Black Crane soldiers were waiting. Kim didn't reach for the weapon hidden at his side. Instead, he kept his hands visible, his expression as flat and cold as the sea behind him. He looked like a man who had already accepted his fate, but his mind was moving faster than a computer. He noticed the slight hum of a drone overhead and the way the wind moved the plastic sheets on a nearby warehouse. There were snipers on the roof, just like he expected. "I'm here." Kim's voice rang out, steady and clear. It didn't shake, even as a dozen red laser dots suddenly appeared on his chest, dancing over his black tie. A heavy metal door groaned open at the far end of the yard. A tall man with a jagged crane tattoo stretching across his throat stepped into the light. He held a thick folder in one hand and a radio in the other. Behind him, two guards dragged a woman whose hands were tied behind her back. Min-hee looked exhausted and pale, but when her eyes met Kim's, she let out a choked sob. "You really came alone," the man with the tattoo laughed, his voice echoing off the metal containers. "The great ghost, surrendering his kingdom for a girl and a memory. Sign the papers, Kim. Give us the codes to your warehouses, and maybe we'll let you say goodbye before we end this." Kim didn't move toward the papers. He took a slow breath, his eyes scanning the layout of the crates one last time. He wasn't just standing there. He had positioned himself exactly where the swaying spotlight would blind the snipers for 2 seconds every time it swung left. He had parked his car at an angle that blocked the line of fire from the side entrance. "The papers are in my pocket," Kim said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a threat. "But you made a mistake. You thought the girl was my weakness." He reached into his jacket, and for a split second, the Black Cranes leaned in, thinking he was reaching for the pen. But Kim wasn't looking at the villain. He was looking at the crane operator high above, a man who wasn't a Black Crane soldier, but one of Kim's own men who had arrived hours ago. "She isn't my weakness," Kim growled, his eyes flashing with a terrifying light. "She's the reason I'm going to make sure none of you leave this dock alive." As the spotlight swung left, blinding the roof team, Kim dived behind a heavy steel crate. The silence of the dock shattered as the first gunshot rang out, starting the bloodiest night the shipyard had ever seen. The shipyard erupted into chaos as bullets hissed through the salt-heavy air, sparking against the metal shipping containers. Kim moved like a blur, his black suit blending into the shadows. He didn't just fire back. He moved with a terrifying, calculated rhythm. Every time a Black Crane soldier stepped into the light, Kim's weapon barked once, and the threat vanished. "Kill him! Kill the ghost!" the man with the neck tattoo screamed, ducking behind a stack of wooden pallets. He grabbed Min-hee by the hair, using her as a human shield as he retreated toward a waiting speedboat. Kim felt a sharp, burning sting in his shoulder as a bullet grazed him, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. He saw the terror in Min-hee's eyes, and behind that, he saw Lydia's face, the little girl who was waiting for her mother to come home. That thought gave him a strength that went beyond training. He wasn't just a mafia boss anymore. He was a father finishing a nightmare. As he sprinted across the open concrete, Kim pulled a small flash device from his pocket and hurled it toward the center of the dock. A blinding white light filled the shipyard, followed by a deafening bang. The guard covering the boat covered their eyes, screaming in confusion. In those 3 seconds of darkness and light, Kim made his move. He slid across the wet pavement, his pistol raised. 2 shots rang out, taking down the guards holding Min-hee's arms. Before the leader could react, Kim was on him. He didn't use his gun. He dropped it and slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, sending them both crashing into the rusting side of a container. The leader swung a heavy fist, hitting Kim in the jaw, but Kim didn't flinch. He grabbed the man's throat with one hand and his wrist with the other, pinning him against the metal. The leader looked into Kim's eyes and saw something that wasn't human. He saw a cold, endless winter. "You should have stayed away from my family," Kim whispered, his voice vibrating with a primal fury. With a swift, powerful motion, Kim disarmed the man and sent him sprawling into the dark water of the harbor. Kim didn't wait to watch him sink. He turned and ran to Min-hee, slicing through her zip-tie restraints with a pocket knife. She collapsed into his arms, shaking and sobbing. "Lydia," she gasped, clutching his blood-stained shirt. She's safe," Kim said, his voice finally breaking as he pulled her close. "She's at home. She's waiting for you." He helped her toward the car, his own body aching and his shoulder bleeding through his expensive silk. The ghost had won his bloodiest battle, but as he looked at the woman he had saved, he realized the victory wasn't about the territory he had kept. It was about the family he had finally earned back. He looked up at the sky, where the first hint of gray dawn was breaking through the fog. The night was over. The morning sun shone brightly over a quiet park in the heart of Seoul, sparkling on the dew-covered grass. It was a peaceful Saturday, far away from the cold marble hallways and the dark, salt-scented docks. Children were laughing as they chased bubbles, and the only sound of business was the distant ringing of a bicycle bell. Kim sat on a wooden bench, leaning back with a relaxed posture that no one would have recognized 6 months ago. He wasn't wearing his usual sharp black suit or his heavy scowl. Instead, he wore a simple dark sweater and soft trousers. His luxury watch was tucked under his sleeve, and his hands, which had once lived for war, were now wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. He looked like any other father enjoying the weekend, though his eyes still moved habitually to scan the park's entrance, a sign that the protector in him never truly slept. A few yards away, Lydia was running through a patch of yellow flowers. She wore a bright pink dress, and her dark hair was no longer tangled, but tied back with neat ribbons. She wasn't carrying a bloody note or a look of heartbreak anymore. Instead, she held a kite string, her face glowing with a wide, toothy smile as the kite soared high into the blue sky. "Look, Daddy, it's flying," she shouted, waving her small hand. Kim didn't just nod or give a cold command. He stood up, a genuine, soft smile breaking across his face. "Higher, Lydia. Keep running." Min-hee sat down on the bench beside him, handing him a small sandwich she had packed for their picnic. She looked healthy and vibrant, the shadows of the shipyard long gone from her face. She reached out and took Kim's hand, her thumb tracing the faint scar on his knuckle. Kim didn't pull away. He squeezed her hand back, acknowledging the silent bond that had pulled them through the darkness. His empire was different now. He had cleaned his house, removing the rats and the violence, turning his business into something that built hospitals and schools instead of fear. He was still a king, but he ruled from the light to keep his family safe. The ghost had finally found a soul. As Lydia came running back, tripping slightly and falling into Kim's lap with a giggle, he picked her up and swung her around. For the first time in his life, Kim wasn't thinking about the next move or the next enemy. He listened to his daughter's laughter and looked at the woman he loved. He had found his true strength, and it wasn't in his guns or his gold. It was right here, in the middle of a sunlit park where the shadows had finally been cleared away for good. The story of Kim and Lydia teaches us that our greatest strength comes from what we are willing to protect. True courage isn't found in a weapon or a title. It is found in the soft hands of a child and the promise to be a better person for the people we love.